Last week, food myths enslaved entire continents. This week, the myths you learned in school, the lies in your textbooks, the stories your teachers repeated without question. 5 myths taught as truth, starting with one that killed 100,000 people. Number 5. British sailors used to die horrible deaths at sea. Their teeth would fall out, their gums would bleed, their bodies would rot from the inside. It was called scurvy, and for centuries no one knew how to stop it, except they did. In 1747, a British doctor named James Lind ran an experiment. He gave some sailors citrus fruit, others got nothing. The ones who ate citrus, completely cured. Lind published his findings. The cure was proven. The science was clear. But here's what they don't teach you. The British Navy ignored it for 40 years. 40 years. 100,000 sailors died. Wait, why would they ignore a proven cure? Because limes were expensive, storage was complicated, shipping was a hassle. The Navy tried cheaper alternatives instead. Sauerkraut, malt, other random remedies. None of them worked, but they cost less. So the Navy kept using them while sailors died. It wasn't until 1795 that they finally mandated lime juice on every ship. By then, tens of thousands dead, unnecessarily. This wasn't ignorance, this was bureaucracy. The cure existed. The evidence was overwhelming. But the system chose cost-cutting over human life. 100,000 sailors dead because limes were too expensive. Remember that next time someone says we didn't know better back then. They knew, they just didn't care. And the next myth? It colonized entire continents based on a complete lie. Number 4. In the year 1165, a letter arrived in Europe. It described a powerful Christian king living somewhere in Asia. His name was Prester John. He ruled a vast, wealthy kingdom, and he wanted to help Europe fight Muslims in the Crusades. Europe went absolutely wild. Popes endorsed the story. Kings funded expeditions. For 300 years, explorers searched for Prester John's kingdom. They scoured Asia, then Africa, then everywhere. Here's the truth. Prester John never existed. The letter was a hoax, probably written by European propagandists. The Crusades were failing badly. Morale was collapsing. Muslims were winning. Europe desperately needed hope, needed a powerful ally somewhere out there. So they invented one. Prester John became a legend, a fantasy, a justification. When Portuguese explorers reached Africa in the 1400s, they told everyone they were searching for Prester John. It wasn't invasion, it was a rescue mission. We're looking for our Christian ally. We have to colonize these lands to find him. By the 1500s, everyone knew Prester John was fiction. But by then, European colonization was already entrenched. A completely fabricated king drove centuries of exploration and colonization. Once the lie served its purpose, it didn't matter that it wasn't real. The damage was done, the wealth was extracted, the empires were built. This pattern doesn't just exist in medieval history, it repeats. Powerful entities invent threats to justify wars. They fabricate evidence, rally public support, launch invasions. And by the time the truth comes out, the consequences are already locked in. You've seen this pattern in your lifetime. I'm not going to name specific examples, you already know them. Because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. History got it wrong. On purpose. And the next myth, it made dinner satanic. Number 3. For 700 years, Europeans refused to use forks, not because they didn't exist, because the church said they were evil. When an Italian princess brought a golden fork to Venice in the year 1004, priests condemned her. They called it vanity, excessive pride, a sin against God. God gave you hands, use them. Using a fork, that's the devil's work. When she died of plague 2 years later, priests said it was divine punishment. See? God killed her for using a fork. For centuries, forks were seen as immoral, sinful, satanic. Here's what really happened. The church didn't hate forks because they were evil. They hated them because they were expensive. Only the ultra-wealthy elite could afford gold and silver forks. Forks became a symbol of aristocratic excess. The church attacked them to criticize the growing power of the rich. It was class warfare disguised as religious morality. You think you're too good to eat with your hands like everyone else? That's pride. That's sin. By the 1600s, forks spread across Europe anyway. Not because the church changed its mind, but because the merchant class got rich enough to afford them. Once middle class people had forks, suddenly they stopped being sinful. Funny how that works. For 700 years, Europeans ate with their hands, and not because of religion, because of economics. The Satanic fork myth was just class politics with a religious excuse. And the next myth, it erased entire civilizations from history. Number 2. You've heard of the Dark Ages. The period after Rome fell, 500 to 1500 AD, Europe descended into ignorance and barbarism. No science, no progress, no culture, just darkness. Except here's the problem. The Dark Ages only happened in Europe, and even that's exaggerated. While Europe was struggling, the Islamic Golden Age was exploding. Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo. Muslim scholars invented algebra, advanced optics, revolutionized medicine. They built hospitals, universities, observatories. They preserved Greek and Roman texts that Europe had forgotten. Without them, the Renaissance wouldn't have happened. China was thriving. The Tang and Song dynasties, printing, gunpowder, the compass, paper money, advanced agriculture. China was more technologically advanced than Europe for most of this period. In fact, the development of money and finance was accelerating across Asia during this time. If you want a deep dive on this, our upcoming Historical Anatomy of Currencies episode will break it down. Africa had flourishing kingdoms, Ghana, Mali, Great Zimbabwe, advanced trade networks, architectural marvels, wealth that dazzled European explorers. So why do we call it the Dark Ages? Because Renaissance scholars in the 1400s wanted to make themselves look good. They said, look how enlightened we are compared to the past. They erased everyone else's progress to make Europe's rebirth seem more dramatic. It worked. For centuries, textbooks taught that the entire world was in darkness for 1,000 years. It wasn't. Only Europe was struggling. And even Europe had moments of brilliance. The Dark Ages is a Eurocentric lie that erased Islamic science, Chinese innovation, and African kingdoms. It made Western civilization look like the only civilization. That myth justified colonialism, imperialism, racism. If the rest of the world was living in darkness, we had the right to enlighten them. Stop calling it the Dark Ages. The rest of the world was doing just fine. And the final myth, it turned state terror into a religious duty. Number 1, everyone's heard of the Spanish Inquisition. Torture chambers, heresy trials, the Catholic Church hunting down sinners, religious fanaticism at its worst. Here's what they don't teach you in school. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't primarily about religion, it was about political control. In 1478, Ferdinand and Isabella had a problem. They were the monarchs who had just united the powerful crowns of Castile and Aragon, laying the foundation for modern Spain. Spain was fragmented, multiple kingdoms, competing nobility, no central authority. They needed a tool to crush opposition and unify the country. So they created the Inquisition. Yes, it targeted Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity, but it also targeted anyone who threatened the monarchy. Political rivals, wealthy merchants, dissenting nobles. The Inquisition would accuse you of heresy, confiscate your property, and eliminate you. Legal terror disguised as religious duty. And here's the key detail. The Spanish monarchy controlled the Inquisition, not the Pope. Rome actually tried to limit its power multiple times. Spain ignored them. Because this wasn't about faith, it was about building a centralized state. The Inquisition ran for over 300 years. Thousands tortured, thousands executed, not for heresy, for political convenience. By hiding behind religion, Ferdinand and Isabella built one of Europe's most powerful monarchies. The consequence? The myth that it was purely religious lets us ignore a pattern that repeats throughout history. Find a moral cause, use it to justify violence, consolidate power. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't unique, it's just the most famous example. State terror disguised as righteousness, that's the real lesson. The Navy let sailors die because curing them was expensive. A fake king justified centuries of colonization. Forks were called Satanic to shame the rich. The Dark Ages erased the achievements of entire civilizations, and the Inquisition was state terror with a religious mask. Every myth you learned in school has a reason it was taught that way. Every story has a truth buried underneath. Next week, I'm exposing the myths nations tell about themselves, The propaganda baked into national identity. The lies countries teach their own citizens. Subscribe, because history isn't what they taught you, it's what they didn't want you to know.